Before you arrived here, before your heart ever beat or your lungs filled with air, there was a decision, a deliberate, conscious agreement made by something far older than your body. That something was your soul. Free from time, detached from form and untouched by the noise of this world, it stood in a space beyond space and chose this life. Not by chance, not by force, but through purpose. Every detail was selected. The family you'd be born into, the environment you'd grow up in, the struggles you'd face. Even the precise era you'd lived through, nothing was accidental. It wasn't just the pleasant moments that were chosen. The happiness, the friendships, the love, yes, those too. But also the heartache, the confusion, the loneliness, the heavy emotions you would carry, the losses that would shape you, the challenges that would stretch the limits of your patience and strength. Your soul embraced all of it because it understood something your human mind would later forget. Growth rarely happens in comfort. Evolution demands friction, and Earth is a place where transformation is born through experience. But with that choice came a condition. The moment you entered this world, you had to forget. You had to let go of everything you knew in your eternal state, your memories, your clarity, your divine awareness. You agreed to step into the unknown and rediscover yourself, piece by piece. That's why from your very first breath, the forgetting began. A veil was drawn. The world wrapped you in identity, labels, expectations. You were given a name, a gender, a role to play, all before you could even speak. As you grew, the world taught you what to believe. It defined reality for you. It told you where you belonged and what was possible. You were shaped by voices outside of yourself, all while something deeper inside quietly watched, waiting for you to remember. And throughout your life, you've likely felt that pull. Moments where everything around you seemed strangely familiar. People you just met who felt like old friends. Dreams that felt more like memories. An inner knowing you couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore either. These weren't coincidences. They were traces, echoes of a truth far greater than what you've been told. They were reminders, signals from the soul that planned this journey. You've walked this path before, and now you're walking it again. Not as punishment, not as a mistake, but as part of something much bigger than the life you see in front of you. This existence wasn't forced upon you. You asked for it. You stepped into it willingly. Not because it would be easy, but because it would matter. And deep down, beneath the noise of everyday life, a part of you still remembers that choice. A part of you has always known there's more to this story than what meets the eye. That knowing is the key to remembering why you're here and who you've always been. From the earliest moments of your life, the world began shaping your perception. Before you understood what choice meant, society handed you a lens, one through which you'd interpret everything. This lens came with labels, definitions, and boundaries. You were taught what was real, what had value, and what should be believed. A name was given to you, followed by a nationality, a set of rules, and a story about how life works. But none of this was truly yours. It was assigned, absorbed and repeated, until it felt like truth. As you grew, the framework only became more rigid. Systems were placed around you, school, work, tradition, all reinforcing the idea that reality is solid, predictable, and external. You were told to focus on achievement, to pursue status, to seek approval from others. You were subtly, and sometimes explicitly, trained to believe that worth comes from what you do, what you have, and how well you fit into a mold. That happiness comes from success, that your identity is fixed. That questioning the structure is dangerous. But here's the problem. What you've been taught to believe is reality is only a small slice of a much larger truth. The physical world, as convincing as it seems, is temporary. Everything you can touch, see, and measure is in constant motion, energy taking form only to dissolve again. Yet most people become so attached to this projection that they forget its fleeting nature. They cling to possessions, chase attention, fear change, and run from discomfort, convinced that these are the rules of life. The illusion isn't just what you see, it's how you've been trained to interpret it. You were told there's only one path: go to school, get a job, buy things, seek stability, follow the crowd. It's a loop, one that repeats itself across generations, rarely questioned, because it's been normalized. But underneath it all, a quiet feeling persists, a sense that something isn't quite right, that maybe, just maybe, there's more than what's being shown. That quiet doubt is not confusion, it's clarity trying to surface. It's the part of you that remembers there's something beyond the screen you've been staring at your whole life. Reality, in the way it's sold to you, is curated, filtered through fear, repetition, and distraction. And the more you buy into it, the more distant you become from the truth of who you really are. To step beyond the illusion isn't to escape the world, but to see it clearly, as a temporary stage, not the full story. When you begin to question what you've been told, when you start noticing how deeply programmed most of your thoughts and desires are, you begin peeling back the layers. And what you find underneath isn't fantasy, it's freedom. Not because you leave the world behind, but because you stop letting it define you. Earth is not simply a place to exist, it's a space designed for growth. What seems like chaos or coincidence in your life often follows a rhythm far older than your current memories. Before arriving here, your soul knew the nature of this place. It understood that to evolve, it would need to forget. It agreed to return, not because it had no choice, but because the lessons it sought could only be found through experience, through contrast, through limitation, through forgetting itself. This physical life is not the first, it may not be the last. The soul, in its vastness, takes on many forms and faces, returning again and again, shaped by past actions and the energy they carry. Each return is not random, but purposeful. It's not about punishment, but potential. The things you face, the patterns that keep showing up, the emotions you struggle to release are invitations, lessons waiting to be truly understood. But most people don't remember this. The system built around human life encourages deep attachment to the physical. People become entangled in roles, relationships, possessions. They identify so strongly with their current experience that they forget it's just one chapter. They chase comfort, success, and recognition, believing this one life is all they have. And in doing so, they stay locked in the loop. Birth, struggle, death, return. Reincarnation isn't a trap. It's a mirror. It reflects the parts of the soul that haven't fully awakened. As long as there's clinging to identity, desire, status, or emotion, the cycle continues, and the forgetting returns. Each lifetime begins with a blank slate, but the energy from before lingers, shaping choices, drawing familiar people and experiences back into the picture. Some souls start to notice. They question the repetition. They feel an ache they can't explain, a knowing they can't trace. These are the signs that remembrance is beginning, that something within is starting to pierce through the illusion. And when that happens, the cycle doesn't end, but it starts to make sense. The idea of karma has been misunderstood. It's not about punishment, it's about balance. Cause and effect stretching across lifetimes, inviting awareness where there was once unconscious action. A soul repeats not because it's condemned, but because it is still becoming whole. And yet few ever reach the point of questioning. Most stay bound to the rhythm of survival. They seek meaning through external achievements, never realizing that what they truly seek is found by looking inward. The loop continues until the moment the soul chooses differently. Death is not an end, but a return. When the body releases its final breath, what remains is not lost, it is released. The consciousness that animated your form doesn't vanish, it transitions. Freed from physical limits, the soul begins to recall what the mind could never fully grasp. The noise of identity fades, and in its place a deeper clarity emerges. One of the first moments after death is not silence, but reflection. You don't just remember your life, you feel it. Every word spoken, every thought held, every action taken echoes back through your awareness. Not from the perspective of the person you were, but from everyone your choices touched. The joy you shared is relived. The pain you caused is experienced as if it happened to you. It's not about judgment. It's about understanding. This process is often called a life review. It's not a punishment nor a reward, but an opportunity, an unveiling of the truth behind your intentions, reactions, and decisions. For some, this moment brings peace. They see the beauty even in their failures, recognizing how much they've grown. For others, it can feel overwhelming, not because they are being condemned, but because they finally see what they were too distracted to notice while alive. Some souls move forward easily. They are ready to let go. They feel complete, no longer tethered to regrets or unfinished stories. But not all find it so simple. Those still attached to people, possessions, power, or pain may linger. Not by force, but by fear. Fear of release, fear of the unknown. These souls remain close to the material plane, unable to fully move beyond what they were once part of. Eventually, whether quickly or slowly, each soul continues its journey. What lies ahead is not uniform. It reflects the state of that soul's awareness. Some encounter landscapes of light, others feel a vast openness beyond form. Time no longer applies, space becomes fluid. In this phase, the soul is not bound by physical rules, but moves according to resonance, energy, and intention. Here, there is healing. A deeper understanding blossoms. The soul sees the web of cause and effect, not just in its own life, but in the connections between many lives. The choices that seemed small are revealed to be significant. Encounters that felt random now glow with meaning. Nothing was wasted. But even after this clarity, a question arises. What now? And for most souls, the answer is to return, not because they must, but because something remains unresolved. Growth is still unfolding, and so they step back into form, choosing a new life, knowing full well they'll forget. Again. The cycle continues, until one day the soul remembers not only what it is, but that it no longer needs to return. Awakening doesn't arrive with lightning or dramatic signs. It begins as a whisper, a quiet discomfort with the ordinary, a growing sense that the world doesn't quite make sense the way it's been explained. For many, it starts as an inner restlessness. Success feels hollow, pleasure fades quickly, and routines become lifeless. This subtle unease isn't failure. It's the soul stirring beneath the surface, preparing to remember. The first step toward remembering is awareness. Real awareness, the kind that observes without judgment, without needing to control or explain. It's not about spiritual jargon or trend-driven practices. It's about presence, being fully with yourself and your experiences, without turning away. Most people move through life reacting, distracted, disconnected. Awareness is the act of stepping back and seeing it all clearly, sometimes for the first time. Next comes the practice of stillness, not silence in your surroundings, but quiet within. Meditation isn't an escape from life, it's a return to what's always been there. When the noise fades, the identity begins to loosen. You're no longer just the job title, the family role, the collection of memories. As those layers fall away, a deeper self begins to surface, not a character in a story, but the one watching the story unfold. Then comes perhaps the most misunderstood key, detachment. Not coldness, not avoidance. True detachment is the ability to participate in life fully without becoming consumed by it. You can love deeply, but not possess. You can strive, but not be defined by outcomes. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're no longer held hostage by what you can't control. These practices are not easy. The world constantly pulls you in the opposite direction. Distractions are endless. Pressure to conform is strong. But those who begin to question, to look inward, to observe rather than react, they start to wake up. They see how many of their desires were inherited, how much of their identity was borrowed, how often they've been running on autopilot. Awakening isn't a single event. It's a process, a gradual peeling away of everything you thought you were until only presence remains. The more you become conscious of your patterns, the more freedom you gain from them. You stop repeating the same emotional cycles. You stop chasing what never satisfies. You begin choosing your path rather than being pulled by momentum. In that clarity, your energy shifts. Life becomes less about accumulation and more about alignment. You move from reaction to response, from fear to trust, from seeking to simply being. The illusion begins to crack, and through those cracks your true nature starts to shine through. not as something you achieve, but something you've always carried within you. Most souls return not because they're forced to, but because they're still holding on. The weight isn't always visible. It's hidden in attachments, expectations, and unresolved emotion. Many people believe freedom comes from having more when in truth, it begins with releasing what no longer serves. Letting go isn't weakness. It's the highest form of courage. The strongest chains aren't physical. They're made of identity. People cling to who they think they are. Their role in society, their background, their beliefs, their opinions. These become masks so convincing they forget there's someone behind them. But the soul isn't concerned with titles or appearances. It isn't interested in validation. It seeks clarity, not labels. Desire, too, keeps the soul bound to repetition. Wanting isn't wrong. It's natural to crave comfort, connection, and joy. But desire becomes dangerous when it turns into dependency. When you begin to define your worth by what you can gain, achieve, or control, you trap yourself in a loop. And loops don't end until something, or someone, chooses differently. Each lifetime, the soul brings with it emotional echoes: fear, guilt, longing, resentment. These aren't punishments, they're clues, signs of what hasn't been released yet. Someone who dies angry often returns still carrying that fire. One who lived for recognition may chase it again in another form. The cycle keeps spinning, not out of cruelty, but because the soul is still looking for peace in places where it can't be found. Letting go doesn't mean becoming indifferent. It means softening your grip. It means experiencing fully without trying to possess or control, to love without clinging, to succeed without being defined by success, to lose without being destroyed by loss. This is the art of non-attachment, not detachment from life, but from illusion. True liberation starts when you realize that none of this, not your name, your status, your possessions, can follow you beyond the grave. They are temporary tools for a temporary experience. The more tightly you hold them, the more trapped you become. But when you open your hands, space is created, space for truth, for presence, for freedom. This is why so many souls remain bound. Not because they're punished, but because they've forgotten that they are not the things they cling to. They are not their pain, not their pride, not their history, and certainly not the endless desires they chase to feel whole. The moment you begin to release what isn't truly yours is the moment the illusion begins to fall away. And in that space, something ancient stirs, the memory of who you really are beneath it all. There comes a point on the path where the soul realizes that even the idea of self is part of the illusion. All the stories, titles, and roles you've claimed, they've served a purpose, but they were never meant to define you forever. At some stage, they must be surrendered, not rejected in anger, but released in understanding, because the self you've built is not the one that is eternal. It's the character your soul agreed to play. Most people spend their lives defending this character. They protect their beliefs, guard their image, and resist anything that threatens their identity. But the identity was always a temporary construction, a useful costume in a single scene of a much larger play. True freedom begins when you can observe this identity without clinging to it, knowing that it is not who you are, only who you've temporarily appeared to be. This process is not about destruction, but return. A return to something more subtle, more expansive. The soul doesn't need a name to know itself. It doesn't require validation to feel complete. What keeps it trapped is the belief that it must become something, when in truth it already is. Transcending the self means no longer striving to find yourself, because what you are cannot be found through effort. It is remembered in stillness. You stop playing the game when you realize you were never the player, only the observer, and in that realization, the game loses its grip. You no longer need to win, to prove, to impress. You move through the world lightly, unattached, clear. Choices are made from peace, not fear. You act not for approval, but from alignment. Most will never reach this point, not because they aren't capable, but because they're still invested in the illusion. They believe they are their thoughts, their past, their roles, and so they continue cycling, believing the solution is in adding more knowledge, more success, more spiritual labels. But transcendence isn't about gaining It's about shedding. When the ego no longer directs your actions, something else emerges. A quiet presence, a stable awareness that watches, listens, and responds without being pulled by emotion or story. This is not numbness, it's clarity. The kind of clarity that can love deeply without attachment, speak truth without aggression, and move forward without fear of what's ahead. To transcend the self is not to vanish, it is to finally exist without distortion. The noise quiets, the masks fall away, and what remains is presence. Not as an idea, not as a role, but as the natural state that was always waiting beneath the surface. And from this space, the illusion can no longer bind you, because once you've seen through it, you can't be trapped by it again. Most people walk through life unaware that they're following a script. They wake, they work, they chase goals set by others, believing they are making choices, when, in truth, they're reacting to a system designed to keep them asleep. Their days pass in loops, their thoughts echo patterns passed down for generations, and all the while something within them remains untouched, waiting to be discovered. Yet among the many who sleep, there are always a few who begin to question. They notice cracks in the illusion. They feel out of place in a world that worships repetition. These individuals don't follow the expected path. They observe it. They begin to see the world, not as it is presented, but as it truly operates, beneath the surface. For them, waking up isn't a moment. It's a choice repeated over and over, against every distraction meant to pull them back in. These rare souls stop seeking meaning in possessions or praise. They recognize the emptiness in chasing validation. Instead of reacting to life, they begin responding from a place of awareness. They slow down. They reflect. They allow silence to speak louder than noise. While the world pushes urgency, they choose presence. Their awakening is not loud. It doesn't look like rebellion. It looks like detachment from illusion. It sounds like clarity in a sea of confusion. And as they shift, the world around them continues spinning. But they are no longer caught in its rhythm. They see others running in circles, chasing things they once believed mattered. But now those desires feel foreign, like echoes of a life they no longer live. To walk this path is not easy. It means letting go of comfort, releasing the familiar, and facing truths that often unsettle. It's the road of deep internal change, not for recognition, but because the soul simply can't pretend anymore. The distractions lose their power, the roles lose their meaning, and what's left is raw, honest being. This path isn't for the many. It's for the few who dare to live without illusion, who choose clarity over comfort and presence over performance. They don't escape life. They transcend it, not by rising above others, but by stepping out of the game entirely. They remember who they are, not through effort, but through surrender. If you've made it this far, there's a reason. That inner nudge you felt, the quiet pull towards something deeper, is not your imagination. It's your soul calling you back. Few will answer. Even fewer will continue walking. But those who do find a peace that can't be shaken, and a freedom that doesn't depend on anything external. The question isn't whether this path exists. It does. The question is, will you take the first step?